Picture this. You are standing alone in the marble corridors of the Lateran Palace, Rome. Candlelight flickers on the frescoed ceilings above your head, but the chill rising from the flagstones presses cold and damp through the soles of your shoes. The air reeks of incense, yet underneath it you catch the unmistakable sourness of sweat, wine, and something darker. A scent that doesn't belong in a house of God. Your fingertips are numb as you grip an iron key, still warm from the trembling hand of a young acolyte who just whispered, "You were never here." The corridor behind you yawns like an open grave. Ahead, a gilded door waits, its surface worn by centuries of secrets. Your heart stammers against your ribs as you realize whatever happens when you turn that key will change what you believe about holiness forever. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of chanting. Each step you take echoes like a confession in the darkness. For 1,000 years, you've been told the popes of Rome lived as celibate shepherds, God's chosen, robed in purity, guiding the souls of millions through the tangled undergrowth of sin. Maybe you imagine them as lonely old men, locked in prayer, untouched by temptation, guardians of the Church's most sacred laws. But tonight, you are about to discover that everything you thought you knew about the papacy is a carefully tended lie. Think the popes were the moral backbone of Christendom? What you are about to witness makes modern scandals look trivial. The truth is far more twisted. Beneath the mitre and gold-stitched vestments lay desires as tangled and fierce as any king's. Beneath every public sermon warning against carnal vice, secret lives flourished behind high walls. Forget the myth of universal chastity. The sexual history of the papacy is a labyrinth of hidden chambers, forbidden lovers, and heirs whose very existence was officially denied. This reality, documented by priests, diplomats, and even the Vatican's own ledgers, would make your skin crawl. But here's where it gets worse. The world outside these palace walls believed in absolute, infallible purity. Millions of faithful on their knees, confessing the smallest flickers of temptation, while the men who judged their souls mapped out networks of secret pleasure. Records show that even as the Church imposed draconian rules on marriage, pleasure, and even thought, the popes themselves wrote new codes for sinning in safety. What you're about to witness will expose centuries of weaponized hypocrisy. Systems that made modern dating scandals seem like innocent children's games. You press onward, the walls closing in, as you recall the faces of those whose reputations rest on this sanctified ground. Pope Alexander VI, notorious for the orgies thrown in his name. Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, whose appetite for both conquest and carnal pleasure left even his confessors speechless. Sixtus IV, who licensed and taxed Rome's brothels from the papal treasury itself. Even the pious-seeming popes kept mistresses hidden in shadowed chambers, their children quietly installed in safe positions across Europe. Behind every rule against flesh, there was a secret ledger tracking the price of indulgence. But why? Why did the holiest office in Christendom become a crucible for such double lives? To answer that, you must understand what it means to wield not just religious power, but the very right to define sin itself. In 14th and 15th century Rome, the papacy was both crown and confessional, the ultimate authority over salvation and the most formidable political force in Europe. As you slip down the side corridor toward the forbidden door, you sense the weight of that power. the ability to condemn millions, and also to erase your own crimes. The Lateran, the Vatican, the palaces at Avignon, all became theaters of desire and control. It was not simply weakness or corruption, but the nature of absolute power itself. When a single man could grant or revoke the privilege of heaven, could dictate the rules of every bedroom from Naples to Paris, who would dare say no to him in his own? You pass painted portraits of popes with hollow eyes, faces frozen in sanctity, but the walls whisper other stories, of secret tunnels beneath the Vatican, of lovers delivered by night, of fortunes spent to hush the cries of the betrayed. Historical records, letters, papal bulls, legal documents paint a picture so intricate and disturbing, you begin to wonder whether the Church's obsession with policing others' bodies was nothing but a mask. You reach the door at last. The key is slick in your grasp. You hesitate, one last moment to cling to innocence, to the world you thought you understood. But the voices from behind the walls are louder now. Moans and laughter, the sound of silk rustling, the snap of a whip, the hissed prayers of those who do not wish to be remembered. As you turn the key, your mind races. Will you be the witness, the judge, or the next victim in a centuries-old cycle of secrets and shame? You step forward, leaving behind every certainty you ever had about faith, flesh, and the men who claim to speak for God. This is the beginning. What you find on the other side of this door will haunt your nights and challenge your understanding of holiness. Because sometimes the greatest darkness hides closest to the altar. But this is only the first step. The true horror, the systematic, institutionalized corruption of the papal courts, lies just ahead, in places you cannot yet imagine. Are you ready to see what was never meant to be seen? The secrets of the medieval popes are waiting. And tonight, you are the one holding the key. You step into a vaulted chamber, your footsteps instantly swallowed by heavy tapestries and thick velvet curtains. The hush inside is not peace, but conspiracy. Candles sputter in twisted gold candelabra, their flames devoured by the incense-thick gloom. The air shivers with the hum of muffled laughter and the clink of silver goblets. This is not a place for prayer, and certainly not for penance. This is a banquet of power, one that reeks of lust, fear, and the privilege to sin without consequence. You stand just inside the door, heart pounding, as eyes turn toward you, robes glimmering, rings flashing on fat fingers. Cardinals in scarlet and bishops in purple cluster at long tables groaning with hams and candied figs. But they are not alone. Women in jewel-bright gowns circulate among the clergy, perfumed and painted, their laughter too loud, their glances lingering on the youngest priest. You realize with a start that these are the so-called spiritual daughters of the Holy Father, mistresses cloaked in sanctity, known to everyone and named by no one. Across the room, Pope Alexander VI himself reclines on a throne of carved walnut. His face is broad and ruddy, his eyes sharp, lips stained purple by wine. He gestures, and a serving boy hurries forward, hands shaking as he refills the papal chalice. You catch snatches of conversation, jokes about sins of the flesh, delivered in Latin, laughter that curdles in the throat. A bishop, face slick with sweat, murmurs a prayer for forgiveness, even as his hand traces the curve of a courtesan's bare shoulder. You are trapped between outrage and fascination, a silent witness to a scene that should be impossible, a court of Christ, transformed into a theater of appetite. But this is only the surface. What lies beneath will shatter you. But here's where it gets truly twisted. The official rules of the church, its endless catalogs of forbidden pleasure, its lists of penances and punishments, exist not to restrain, but to redirect. The higher the rank, the deeper the indulgence, the more elaborate the disguise. In the shadows of the banquet hall, you glimpse a priest handing a sealed letter to a veiled woman. Hush money, you realize, payment for silence, or perhaps for a secret birth. Documents from the Vatican archives reveal that the Church kept its own ledgers, lists of papal offspring, sums paid for their upkeep, gifts of land and titles to the mothers. The Borgia children, Cesare, Lucrezia, Juan, all officially acknowledged as nepotes or nieces and nephews, but whispered about openly in every court from Florence to Madrid. Papal bulls issued with trembling hands warn against clerical incontinence. But the reality is far more systematic. Cardinals who fail to control their own desires are quietly transferred, not punished. Scandals are managed by a web of secretaries, confessors, and papal guards whose loyalty is ensured by gold, threat, and the knowledge that everyone is guilty of something. You watch as a young priest, pale and sweating, is summoned to the Pope's side. Alexander's voice is low, his words measured, but the message is clear. What you saw tonight, you will never speak of again. The priest bows his head, crossing himself, eyes wide with terror. You sense in that moment the real engine of papal power. Not faith, but fear. Secrets are currency here, traded in whispers, recorded in secret registers. A misstep means exile, disgrace, or worse. But what you don't know is that the Vatican's networks go deeper still. Beyond the palaces, tunnels snake beneath the city, secret passages connecting the Lateran, the Vatican, and the brothels licensed by papal decree. Night after night, clergy slip through these corridors to houses of pleasure, their sins protected by an army of guards sworn to silence. Contemporary chronicles describe the entertainment establishments that line the banks of the Tiber, their profits flowing directly into church coffers. Pope Sixtus IV, in the late 15th century, levied taxes on these houses, arguing in public that such revenues were needed for the glory of Rome, while in private, the proceeds funded cathedral construction and military campaigns. You find yourself wondering, how many innocent confessions have been weaponized in this world? How many sins forgiven by day are committed again by night, with the knowledge that absolution is only a prayer away? As you drift through the chamber, you overhear another conversation. A cardinal nervously whispering about blackmail, about letters intercepted, and threats made. You realize that confession, meant to purify, has become a tool of control. The priests listen, record, and when necessary, destroy. But the horror goes beyond individuals. This is a system, a machine fueled by desire and secrecy, where the rules that bind the faithful serve only to tighten the power of those above. Papal illegitimate children rise to rule cities and armies. Church land is distributed as dowries to mistresses, and the lines between spiritual authority and worldly vice blur into shadow. The Pope himself sets the example. A man who claims to be Christ's vicar while living as a prince, surrounded by lovers, children, and sycophants. Here's where the nightmare sharpens. You watch a cardinal, his face white as chalk, approach the Pope with trembling hands. He delivers a confession, not of sin, but of blackmail. A note threatening to expose the names of papal lovers, to reveal the secret lineages that sprawl from the heart of the Church out into every noble house of Italy. Alexander's eyes narrow, his voice a cold whisper. You know what happens to those who betray the family. In that moment, you sense the real terror of this world. Not just the pleasures stolen in the dark, but the endless, gnawing fear of exposure. Every secret is a weapon. Every sin is a noose. And you, standing among these men, feel the weight of centuries pressing on your shoulders. What you've seen tonight, what you can never unsee, explains more about the Catholic Church than any doctrine or dogma. Now you're beginning to see how deep these secrets go. If you want to uncover the truths that the Church tried to bury, hit subscribe now. You'll never see history the same way again. But don't look away, because the next revelation is about to drag you deeper, where the Church's shadow touches every corner of Rome, and the horrors are only just beginning. Night in Rome is supposed to be sacred, marked by church bells and candlelit prayers echoing down ancient streets. But you're no longer a pilgrim. Tonight, you follow the winding alleys behind St. Peter's, not as a worshiper, but as a shadow, tasked to observe what is never spoken. Your guide is a papal scribe, face hooded, words clipped by fear. He leads you across the Tiber, where the river laps at the stone embankments beneath the moon. Here, the city's silence is shattered by laughter and music leaking from shuttered windows. You pass beneath an arch carved with the arms of a cardinal, and suddenly you're standing in front of a house that no guidebook would dare mention. A so-called entertainment establishment with doors wide open to men in crimson, purple, and black. The scribe doesn't look back as you enter, but his hand tightens on your arm. Remember what you see. But tell no one inside. The stench of wine, perfume, and sweat is overwhelming. Shadows twist in the corners, and everywhere there are women, dressed in silks finer than a queen's, yet their smiles never reach their eyes. You realize these are no ordinary brothels. These are the infamous houses licensed, taxed, and in some cases, owned by the Church itself. But here's where your understanding is ripped apart. The scribe produces a sheet of parchment, a list of official licenses signed by papal secretaries, stamped with seals bearing the keys of St. Peter. You recognize the names: House of the Red Dove, House of Venus, even the Cardinal's hat. Every one of these establishments operates under the protection of Rome's highest clergy. Documents from the late 15th century show Pope Sixtus IV personally authorized the taxation of brothels, justifying it as a means to fund the rebuilding of Rome and the defense of Christendom. But the prophets don't just fill the Vatican's vaults. They grease the palms of bishops, cardinals, even the Pope's own relatives. And this is only the beginning. In a candlelit alcove, you watch as a group of young men, barely more than boys, are herded by a priest into a back room. The scribe leans in and whispers, "These are the sons of Roman nobility. And some are the Pope's own blood." You understand suddenly that these so-called pleasure houses double as recruitment grounds for alliances, blackmail, and even grooming of future church leaders. The lines between vice and virtue, between piety and profit, have been obliterated. But the hypocrisy grows more grotesque with every step. In a shadowed corridor, you see bishops in deep discussion with the madam, negotiating rates for special services. The walls are hung with icons of saints, and above the bar, a crucifix glimmers, blessing the transactions below. Official Vatican records from the period confirm what your eyes refuse to believe: that revenues from brothels financed not just cathedral construction, but also the private parties of church leaders. The House of the Red Dove alone paid enough tax to refurbish the Pope's summer residence. Just when you think you've seen the depths of corruption, you stumble upon a secret gathering in the house's grand hall, a masked ball attended by high-ranking clergy and city elites. The Pope's own sons, Cesare and Juan Borgia, circulate through the crowd, whispering to courtesans and passing envelopes of gold to favored clients. It is common knowledge here that the Pope's children act as silent partners, managing the city's most profitable houses of pleasure from the shadows of the Vatican itself. You hear it confirmed in snatches of conversation. The Borgia boy handles the contracts. No one questions him, not even the city guard. The spectacle is almost ritualistic. Priests raise goblet and toasts to sin forgiven, while the real business of the church, power, profit, and pleasure, unfold in the next room. You catch sight of a cardinal, half-masked, slipping into a private chamber with a courtesan, as a priest outside marks down the transaction in a leather-bound ledger. Every act, every payment is recorded for the Vatican's benefit, ensuring that even the most secret desires become leverage in future negotiations. This is a world where nothing is truly private, and every sin can be converted into power. But here's where the horror intensifies. You're led down a spiral stair to a stone cellar, colder and darker than the world above. Here, you find the evidence that tears away the last remnants of faith in papal purity. A locked chest filled with letters of confession, legal waivers, and lists of nobles who owe debts, financial and otherwise, to the church's pleasure houses. And these documents, the scribe murmurs, keep more people loyal to the papacy than any sermon ever preached. A chill creeps up your spine. The brothels are not simply tolerated, they are an arm of papal power, a system of control more effective than any doctrine. Even the women here are forced to participate in a dance of secrets, knowing that a whisper in the wrong ear could mean ruin or death. The house's madam keeps her own ledger, a double book of clients and favors, all to be used when Rome's tides of power shift. You realize that beneath the laughter and the candlelight, this is a world ruled by fear, a fear sharpened into loyalty by the promise of pleasure and the threat of exposure. Back on the street, the city's bells begin to ring for midnight prayers. But inside the houses of pleasure, the night is just beginning. As you step into the darkness, the scribe stops you with one last truth. What happens in these walls changes the fate of nations. The Pope's sons are not just princes. They are kingmakers, using secrets bought with flesh to control the thrones of Europe. And you, standing outside these doors, heart pounding with what you've seen, are left with a single question. If this is what lies beneath the mitre, what horrors still wait in the Holy of Holies itself? The next step will take you into the heart of papal depravity, where pleasure and power fuse into a weapon sharper than any sword, and Rome's salvation is paid for in the currency of sin. The secrets of the medieval popes aren't just hidden, they are woven into the very fabric of the church. Are you ready to follow the trail deeper, where every answer only breeds a more terrible question? You are summoned before dawn to the Vatican Palace, the city still shrouded in darkness, and the alleys slick with last night's rain. Papal guards block the streets, their armor glinting as torches sputter against the wind. You move quickly, head bowed, pulse drumming in your throat. The guards wave you through with knowing glances. They've seen you before, and they know why you've come. It is an invitation no one can refuse. Inside, the palace is transformed. Gone are the processions and solemn prayers you've witnessed as a pilgrim. Tonight, the Vatican is a private stage, a labyrinth of flickering candles, velvet drapes, and golden platters piled high with exotic fruits and roasted meats. You catch the scent of spiced wine and something sharper: sweat, fear, anticipation. Everywhere you look, the boundaries between priest, prince, and predator blur and dissolve. You are led into the heart of the revelry, where Pope Alexander VI presides over a gathering that defies every law and sermon ever thundered from a Roman pulpit. Here, bishops and nobles gamble with dice and jewels. Priests and courtesans slip away behind curtains, trailing laughter and the rustle of silk. Tonight is the banquet of chestnuts, a gathering so infamous that even centuries later, diplomats' letters and Vatican archives recall its details with horror. Naked courtesans crawl on hands and knees across the polished marble, picking chestnuts from the floor while cardinals watch, wagering who will collect the most. Wine flows like blood, and the servants refill goblets faster than the men can drink them. But this is no mere indulgence. This is ritual, an annual demonstration that papal pleasure is law, that the rules binding the faithful do not apply to those who make them. As dawn edges toward the horizon, the guests become more reckless, the games more perverse. You see a cardinal lose his ring in a bet, only to win it back by naming the Pope's favorite mistress. The winners are rewarded with the company of the youngest courtesans. The losers must kneel and kiss the Pope's foot before all. But here's where the mask drops, and the true machinery of papal power is revealed. These orgiastic feasts are more than private entertainment. They are weapons. You watch as Alexander's secretary hands him a thick ledger, its cover worn by years of use. In its pages are not prayers, but debts, secrets, confessions, records of every guest's indiscretions. The ledger is power incarnate, its entries leverage for favors, alliances, and blackmail. If a bishop resists a papal command, his sins are read back to him in chilling detail. If a nobleman protests a church tax, a letter appears on his doorstep, recounting his midnight visit to a Vatican pleasure room. Documentary anchors surface everywhere. The Venetian ambassador, in a letter to the Doge, describes these nights of horror where the Holy Fathers barter virtue for obedience. Historian Johann Burchard, master of ceremonies to Alexander VI, records in his diary that no hour of the night was safe from the summons of pleasure or the threats of disgrace. Vatican account books show gifts of land and gold delivered the morning after, the price of silence or loyalty. But the most chilling lesson isn't the spectacle. It's the normalization. By sunrise, the servants are cleaning up spilled wine and strewn chestnuts. The priests confess, receive penance, and celebrate Mass before breakfast, as if nothing had happened. The palace returns to its holy order, its velvet curtains swept aside to let in the morning sun. The only evidence of the night's depravity are the tired eyes of the guests and the subtle, ironclad chains of new obligation. You realize, in Rome, sin is currency, pleasure is politics, and forgiveness is for sale. But the horror isn't finished yet. You are beckoned to a side chamber, where a trembling nun waits on her knees. Her face is bruised, her habit torn. She whispers that she has seen too much. Priests brought against their will. Women forced into silence by threats of damnation or ruin. The price for breaking papal rules is not only shame, but imprisonment, torture, or exile. The archives are full of petitions from ruined lovers and illegitimate children, begging the church for mercy that never comes. And the greatest betrayal is how the faithful themselves enable the system. Outside, crowds gather for morning mass, never suspecting what lies behind the chapel walls. Families confess their secrets, hoping for forgiveness, while their shepherds use those confessions as tools for control. Papal indulgences are hawked in the streets, promising to wipe away sins while fueling the very system that breeds them. What you've witnessed tonight is not the fall of a single man, but the rise of a machine. A church that feeds on secrecy, guilt, and desire, where sin becomes the key to survival, and every soul is for sale. And as the city awakens, you realize the true horror. The system endures, unquestioned, protected by the very people it devours. But there is still one place deeper, one chamber more hidden, where the most dangerous secrets wait, where the rules themselves are rewritten, and the church's obsession with controlling the flesh turns from hypocrisy to terror. Are you ready to descend further? The next revelation will show you the weaponized heart of papal confession, and what happens when sin becomes the church's most valuable treasure. You are summoned again, not by torchlight, but by a parchment note pressed into your palm during morning prayers. The writing is elegant, the seal unmistakable, the keys of St. Peter, red wax crushed beneath a bishop's ring. You're told to report to the confessionals, deep within the heart of the Vatican. As you pass through labyrinthine corridors, you notice the silence is deeper here, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves are listening. Every echo reminds you that nothing in this place is truly forgotten. The confessional booth is a cage of carved wood, shadowed by a velvet curtain. You kneel on cold stone, your breath misting in the dawn air. Across the thin lattice, you hear the voice of the confessor, not gentle but clipped, insistent, and more curious than holy. Instead of absolution, you find yourself interrogated. The priest's questions are precise, invasive, and endless. When? With whom? What did you desire? The ledger in his hand is not just for penance. It is a registry, a record of human weakness. And you sense every answer you give is added to a secret archive. But here's where the system reveals its teeth. You think confession is a path to forgiveness, but in the Vatican, it is a net. The Church, obsessed with purity and doctrine, has weaponized the act of confession into a system of surveillance and control. Manuals for confessors, written by men like Cardinal Pietro Bembo, outline hundreds of questions for every imaginable sin. They instruct priests to probe not just for deeds, but for thoughts, dreams, impulses. A married woman confesses to a moment's pleasure. The priest records her name, the details, and the penance. A priest admits to temptation. He is noted, watched, and sometimes promoted, if he knows how to stay silent and useful. Historical records from the Synod of the Lateran in 1215 reveal the extent of this machinery. The Church established mandatory confession not only as a sacrament, but as a source of intelligence. Priests collect not only sins but secrets, rivalries, heresies, hidden affairs, names of lovers, enemies, and more. This information forms a currency more valuable than gold, a means to bind, to threaten, to raise or ruin any life at the Church's pleasure. But the horror deepens as you glimpse the fates of those who fall afoul of this invisible system. The confessional is not a sanctuary, but a trap. Nuns who confess forbidden love are imprisoned in convents for life. Lovers of popes and cardinals are threatened into silence or exile. The story of Sister Olympia, dragged from her cell and paraded through the streets for daring to speak the truth, echoes in the stone. Letters in the Vatican archive tell of young men cast into dungeons, priests relocated under false charges, women forced to take penance that borders on torture. And what of those who are truly dangerous, who threaten to expose the rot at the center of power? The Church has 1,000 tools: forged documents, false accusations, the silent workings of the Inquisition. The very act of confession becomes a double-edged sword. What you say for salvation can be twisted into a weapon against you. Enemies of powerful popes are brought to public ruin, their most private secrets bared for all to see. Even kings and queens have bent the knee, terrified of the Church's power to unearth their shame. But the greatest horror is not the cruelty of the system, but its acceptance. The faithful come, week after week, believing that confession is a balm, never knowing it is the Church's sharpest blade. The priests themselves are prisoners of the game. If you refuse to record a secret, you risk suspicion. If you record too much, you risk blackmail or death. The most loyal become the most dangerous, those who know enough to destroy and enough to survive. You watch as the machinery grinds on, swallowing every whisper, every weakness. A cardinal reviews a list of confessions, deciding who shall be forgiven and who shall be watched. An archivist locks away a file marked with the seal of a rival bishop. A nun, weeping, signs her name to a document she will never see again. The Church's legal system becomes a fortress, its rules so complex that only the powerful can bend or break them. But here is the final, most poisonous twist. The more the system grows, the more the faithful believe in its necessity. Sin becomes not a danger to be avoided, but a currency, an entry ticket into a world where everyone is guilty, and guilt itself is power. The papacy, which claims to guard the gates of heaven, now holds the keys to every bedroom, every secret, every soul in Christendom. And yet, outside these walls, the world keeps turning. The crowds gather for blessing. The pilgrims kneel at the altar, unaware that the line between sinner and saint has been blurred beyond recognition. The greatest power of the papacy is not in its armies or its treasures, but in its knowledge of what you dare not speak. The next chamber is the darkest yet, a place where the papal mask slips entirely, and you witness the breaking point. A world where the Pope himself is held captive by the web he has spun, and where the only law that matters is the law of secrets. Are you prepared to look behind the final veil, where the most forbidden truths wait to be confessed? The climax is coming, and what you find there will haunt you long after the bells have fallen silent. You stand now in the Vatican's innermost chamber, the air heavy with incense and dread. It is midnight. The marble walls close in, trapping secret like stale breath. This is the room that no map shows, where only the most trusted or the most dangerous are ever summoned. You are not alone. The Pope sits at a table of black walnut, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, fingers twisting a rosary until the beads draw blood. Arrayed before him are a circle of cardinals and confessors, faces pallid, lips pressed tight. Tonight, you will bear witness to the final unmasking. A scribe produces a bundle of parchment, letters, ledgers, confessions, all stained with the sweat and fear of decades. Each document is a blade poised above a powerful neck. Records of the Pope's lovers, the secret children scattered across Europe, the bribes paid for silence and loyalty, the blackmail that holds kingdoms together by a fraying thread. The silence is suffocating. You can hear the distant toll of a church bell, 1, 2, 3, each peal marking the countdown to ruin. Then, the betrayal. One of the Pope's own sons, once a loyal shadow, steps forward and lays a sealed letter on the table. His hand trembles, but his voice is iron. "Father," he says, "they know everything. If I fall, so do you." The room erupts. Cardinals shout. Priests weep. And the Pope, God's vicar on earth, clutches his head in agony, groaning prayers that will never be heard. A confession forced not by faith, but by the terror of exposure. You see, in a flash, the true cost of centuries of secrets. Even the man who claimed the keys into heaven is a prisoner of the very sins he condemned. But here's where the horror peaks. Guards sweep in, dragging away witnesses, tearing ledgers from desperate hands. Those who know too much vanish, exiled, silenced, or erased from the records forever. In the confusion, a servant stumbles and spills a sack of gold coins across the marble. It is hush money, payment for silence, scattered like spilled blood. You realize this is not the first purge. It will not be the last. The Vatican's archives overflow with records of sudden deaths, ruined reputations, and vanished witnesses. The game is endless. The stakes always mortal. As the carnage unfolds, you catch the Pope's eyes, wide and frantic, searching for mercy that does not exist. He is alone, surrounded by the machinery he built. Each cog, each priest, each parchment now turned against him. The very system designed to protect has become the engine of his destruction. In this moment, the weight of every hidden pleasure, every lie, every soul crushed beneath the papal throne, bears down like a curse. Outside, the faithful still gather for morning mass, unaware that the man blessing them is haunted by shadows. The rituals go on, the incense rises, but the walls remember. The Pope will give his benediction, his voice trembling, his heart locked in a prison of guilt and fear. Nothing has changed, and yet everything is broken. You feel it, centuries of pain woven into the marble, each confession echoing the same impossible question. How can you trust a shepherd whose own soul is lost in the darkness? Now, as dawn stains the sky with crimson, the Vatican's doors open to the world once more. But you having seen the midnight trial, can never return to innocence. You know now what the church worked so hard to hide. The corruption was not an accident, but a system. The pain was not a side effect, but the price of power. The greatest horror was not in the secret acts themselves, but in the centuries of silence and complicity that let them flourish. So what do you do now that the spell is broken? You remember. You bear witness. You see the world as it truly is, a place where the powerful build their thrones atop the bones of the forgotten, where every holy promise comes at a terrible cost, and where the truth is always waiting, buried beneath centuries of stone and prayer. You came into this story believing in the myth of papal purity, but now you understand the machinery of secrets that shaped faith, power, and shame across an entire civilization. If this journey has opened your eyes, hit subscribe now. You'll keep unearthing truths that textbooks, priests, and kings wanted erased from history. There are more forbidden stories, more shattered sanctuaries, more darkness, and only by knowing can you ever hope to see the light.